I'm Representative Gene Ward, and we're at the state capitol in the Olelo broadcast studio talking about the economy, the Council of Revenues, and I have two distinguished guests, the chair and the vice chair of the Council of Revenues, Dr. Paul Brewbaker and Professor Suyderhoud. You know, a lot of people have the impression that the governor or we in the legislature actually control the budget and how much money we can spend. Actually, you guys are the ones. You guys are kind of like the Federal Reserve. You say, well, here's how much money we got, here's how much we don't have. And this is something people got to understand. If you think it's the governor or the legislature, it's really these guys. And I want to see how that fits into all of the things that they structured it for and how you guys go about doing that. And I know you got some slides to show.
Hawaii is a unique state in that about the time Jack came to the University of Hawaii, so it's his fault.
30 years ago.
70
years ago.
The Constitutional Convention called for legislation to establish an independent forecast group to make the revenue forecast. And so in the spirit of that assignment, the legislature created a statute that has reporting dates and the configuration of the council. But again, the principle was that it was designed to be independent.
Arm's length, objective.
Yes. Arm's length, outside the government per se. As a practical matter, it's been hard for the council to be populated entirely by people without government affiliation. And at one point in the 1990s, we realized we were all either UH faculty members or lecturers. Many of us who were not actual faculty members were still lecturing at the UH. So the criterion has been interpreted a little more loosely so that the most talented economists could be convened along with business leaders so that we have a forecast that's relying on the best economic theory.
And I would say that we take that sense of independence very seriously. We do try to do the best we can without regard to where any political chips may fall as a result of our forecasting.
Yeah.
And in the more than 20 years that I've been involved in the council off and on, that's always been the case.
Mm-hmm. So is it like a judge? You can't actually call up the judge and influence the case? Or you get the calls, you just don't listen to them? Or
well, we're seldom I can't recall any time that anybody has approached me.
So they leave you alone.
It's not just us. I think everybody adheres to the spirit of the original design from 30 years ago. The governor's office, the legislative leadership, and kind of let us do our thing, look at the economy, and then come up with the forecast based on
I've had some people ask, why are you guys doing this? Or, what's up with you guys? Or any idea what you're going to be saying next week? That sort of thing, but nothing serious.
I'm going to get to that question at the end, by the way. There's a crystal ball somewhere that you guys got in your pocket. But what did they do before? If now this is the objectification of it, what was before the 1978 Constitutional Convention? What did they do?
I don't actually know, although we've had we had a member this year, Rick Cale, who was an old tax director who probably knows what it was like before those days. I can tell you that the pattern across the country is diverse and quite different. Typically, there's a certain amount of autonomy, but not complete autonomy. So Hawaii's kind of unique in that case. And in the worst cases, in states which I won't name specifically, I hear stories like, well, the governor says this is the forecast, and no, the governor says this is the budget, and then we make a forecast that's equal to the budget. So that's the risk, I think, that lawmakers in Hawaii were trying to avoid, that the revenue forecast be adapted to a budget without regard for what is realistic. And instead, the legislature tried to turn it around and say, let's have an objective forecast and then drive the budget to be grounded in that forecast.
There's another aspect of what we do. In addition to forecasting general fund tax revenues, we also, on an annual basis, forecast total personal income of the state. And as part of that constitutional mandate, the total personal income growth of the state also limits the total growth of the state budget. So we have the two things that we forecast as part of our responsibilities.
So there are two ways in which you guys, as legislators, are actually forced to try to adhere to a balanced budget principle. One is every year you try to match revenues and expenditures. But the other is that expenditures can never grow faster than the economy is growing. with an
As measured-
measured
as
by
measured.
personal income growth.
You know, I want to get into the mechanics, but you bring up one of the questions I had as I was preparing for today, in that why is it always that the revenues are based on what's coming down versus why not an average of 3 years behind so we know exactly how much money we got rather than, well, like this time, you guys
Personally-
have gone three times downgrading, basically.
Well, that's different. No, but to answer your question, personal income is actually, the rule in the Constitution is that your guideline for the growth of expenditure is actually a moving average of personal income growth, and we're just asked to forecast
Right.
one of those so that you
Okay.
can average it in.
Assuming that personal income growth and the economy and revenues are linked?
Well, they are to a large
should be.
extent. Yeah,
I
they
can
are.
show you a picture of it.
Great segue.
we had
We
great
got a great
segue.
segue.
Yeah,
We have a
yeah.
lot of
Picture.
slides. This is a learning. This is kind of like economics 101, the state of the
Yeah.
economy
And
in
I've
Hawaii.
forgotten to label the scales, but personal income adjusted for inflation is the top series here in blue, the little
It's blue,
coupas.
okay.
And then the series on the bottom is general fund revenue, again adjusted for inflation. So you can see more or less
Pretty
they move with each
close.
other. The shaded areas are recession, so those are periods where the increase drops off and the thing flattens out or falls a little bit. And of course, most recently, right at the tail end, you see that big drop in general fund revenue, which is kind of decoupled from the economy in a way. And what's happened is that income has fallen a little bit in real terms, but consumers have just gone into a cave and they're hiding out, not spending, and as a result, tax revenues have fallen off.
That's
I'm hoping
the
by-
so-called deleveraging that's going on. Everybody's trying to reduce their debt, and they're not spending money.
Which is then the answer to the question you just had a second ago. Well, how come you guys were revising every time you met for the last year? And because you can see, this is really in the next slide, I have a close-up. It's really an extraordinary drop, this
Oh, my goodness.
decoupling, as you will, of tax revenue from income from a massive behavioral shift that consumers have made to move away from the kind of behavior they had in the past with high consumption, lots of borrowing, to a pattern of behavior that involves higher saving and less consumption.
Paul, we're scared. Professor, we're scared. We're holding on to our money just like in the Depression was the thing that didn't really get the economy moving because those who had what they had, they wanted to keep it or at least elongate it, keep it as long as they could. And I'm hoping before the end of our show, you're going to give some news and some things about what an economy is about and how important consumption is and how people spending their money actually helps us get out of that downturn.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognize, as you point out, that individually we adopt behavior which, when you add it all up in the current instance, causes this massive decrease in spending because, as you say, we're hoarding. However, it's still the case that it was probably individually rational for individual households and individual businesses to be cutting back, given the financial uncertainties that came from the financial crisis. So,
And you also have to remember that personal consumption in the United States was 70% of GDP in 2007, 2008,
it's a big
which
number.
is a really big number. And not only the United States economy, but the global economy had basically become dependent on the American consumer as kind of the locomotive that pulled everybody forward. And that was not sustainable. And it's proven not to be sustainable. And what we're dealing
What
with
figure
is that locomotive slowing down and trying to figure out what else is going to drive our
70%
economy.
ratcheted down to what would be a healthy percentage? I thought it
well,
was
probably-
65 or...
Well, it was 65 at one point,
Yeah.
but it's gone
it
up.
had gone up, and then now it's in the process of having just made this sudden adjustment overnight. Over the 20 years from 1990 to about 2008, let's say, the savings rate decreased from 8% to nil, and it had been 8% for 30 years prior to that. So that was savings that used to be personal consumption. I'm sorry, there was savings that turned into personal consumption.
We just kept
and
buying,
overnight went
consuming.
back
Right.
to being
Right. And cheap credit was part of that story.